Look at what just happened. Spain, Switzerland, and now India have refused to purchase the most advanced American fighter jet, the F-35. Together, these canceled deals were worth roughly $25 billion, money that will now go to America's competitors. The reason? Donald Trump's tariffs. By imposing massive duties on imports from these countries, he hoped to pressure their governments on key issues. But in response, they said, "Enough. If you raise the prices on our goods, we will not spend billions on yours." Spain is now betting on European fighters. Switzerland has no intention of rewarding a trading partner who makes business more difficult. And India, the most important potential US buyer in Asia, is signaling that it may turn to Russia or China for new fighter jets. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has openly stated that he is ready for this confrontation and has no intention of bending to Trump's demands. This is not just a lost sale, it is a strategic gift to America's main rivals. And the consequences do not end there. When countries walk away from US weapons, they also break free from dependence on American maintenance, spare parts, and personnel training. That means Washington's influence over their militaries diminishes. For India, this could mark the beginning of closer alignment with BRICS, something it had previously avoided. So let's break down how these cancellations happened, what they mean for America's position in Europe and Asia, and why other countries may follow. In 2025, no Asian leader was closer to Washington's inner circle than India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, held talks with Vice President J.D. Vance, hosted and visited high-ranking U.S. delegations. This was not casual diplomacy, but targeted, high-level engagement covering trade, defense cooperation, energy, and long-term strategic planning. At the start of the year, New Delhi's goal was clear: to strengthen its partnership with America. But now, newspaper headlines are mocking Modi for believing Trump was a reliable ally. The reversal has been sharp and unexpected. To grasp the scale, it's worth recalling just how close the cooperation had become. India had become one of the most valuable clients of the American defense industry. Since 2008, New Delhi had signed contracts worth over $20 billion. When Modi and Trump met in February, the US president promised not only to maintain that level of arms trade, but to increase it. The list of past purchases is impressive. C-17 Globemaster transport aircraft, P-8I patrol aircraft, Apache and Chinook helicopters, modern artillery systems, and the latest intelligence equipment. Military ties ran even deeper. Regular exercises with the US Army and naval maneuvers with Japan and Australia. India had even allowed US ships to use its ports for refueling and repairs. A low-profile but highly important move for the entire Indo-Pacific region. That's why the cancellation of the $3.6 billion F-35 contract came as a real shock to Washington. It was supposed to be the logical next step. India moving from support aircraft and helicopters to fifth-generation fighters. The deal was part of a broader US strategy in the Indo-Pacific, where India was seen as a key counterweight to China. But that plan has collapsed. Years of trust and painstaking diplomacy crumbled almost instantly. And the reason was not the aircraft, but oil. The rift began when Washington reacted harshly to India's continued purchase of cheap Russian oil. Despite sweeping Western sanctions, New Delhi was buying millions of barrels each month, refining them domestically and selling some of the petroleum products to other countries, effectively keeping Russian fuel moving on global markets. For the United States, this was far too serious to ignore. As the world's third-largest consumer and importer of oil, India's purchases can influence prices, shipping routes, and the effectiveness of sanctions. In the third year of Russia's war in Ukraine, India spent an enormous 49 billion euros on Russian oil. That money not only kept Indian refineries running, but also provided Russia with a steady inflow of foreign currency, weakening the impact of the sanctions that Washington and its allies were counting on. For the White House, this was not just about energy, but also about control. Sanctions are meant to deprive Moscow of the resources to wage war, but India's large-scale purchases undermined that strategy. The ability to influence New Delhi's trade decisions meant not only putting pressure on Russia, but also controlling oil flows, preserving leverage in commodity markets, and keeping one of Asia's strongest countries within the orbit of American policy. Donald Trump and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent viewed India's actions as a direct challenge. Trump called this trade unacceptable, and Besant accused New Delhi of not being a good global player, stating that the purchases of Russian oil had become a constant source of irritation for the United States. And then came the tariffs. First, Trump imposed 25% duties on Indian goods. Soon after, he doubled them to 50%. The message was clear: stop buying Russian oil or prepare for serious economic consequences. But New Delhi refused to give in. Indian officials insisted they were acting in their country's best interests and reminded Washington that other U.S. partners also continued importing Russian oil, albeit in different forms. The dispute quickly grew beyond India. Trump made a high-profile statement that all members of the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, would face the same consequences if they continued such policies. This was effectively a declaration of a tariff war against the world's largest developing economies. One of the most notable casualties was the nearly $4 billion F-35 contract. India walked away from it, making clear that under the current conditions, the purchase was off the table. If New Delhi now turns to Russian or Chinese fifth-generation fighters, the consequences will go far beyond the collapse of a single deal. Such a move would strengthen U.S. rivals' positions in the Indo-Pacific, expand their influence from the Arabian Sea to the South China Sea, complicate U.S. naval operations, reduce opportunities for joint exercises, and weaken America's ability to defend allies in a region already bracing for a new round of confrontation. These consequences strike at multiple levels of U.S. strategy. India is the only country in the region that, by its scale, location, and military power, can truly counterbalance China in the Indian Ocean. If trust is broken, America's position in the region becomes less secure. The U.S. defense industry would also take a hit. Complex platforms like the F-35 depend on large-scale production runs and long-term contracts. Losing the fast-growing Indian market sends orders to Russia, France, or even China, and allows India to purchase weapons in other currencies, bypassing the dollar and reducing U.S. influence. There is also an intelligence dimension to the issue. India's geography makes it an ideal vantage point for monitoring China and Pakistan. If relations deteriorate, intelligence sharing could shrink, leaving the U.S. with fewer options for keeping threats in the region under close watch. Every decision in the coming month will determine not only the future of U.S.-Indian relations, but also the overall balance of power in Asia. Meanwhile, in Europe, the situation for Washington is getting steadily worse. The rift is becoming visible almost in real time. Two countries that for a long time were part of the American defense network, Spain and Switzerland, are beginning to step away from the F-35 procurement program. And here, the issue is not only about money, it is about trust, political influence, and the unraveling of military ties that took decades to build. Let's start with Spain, a NATO member controlling the gateway to the Mediterranean and access to the North Atlantic. Spain had for decades been a reliable partner, hosting U.S. ships, participating in NATO missions, and buying American aircraft. The planned purchase of F-35 fighters was not just another deal. It was meant to lock Spain into the American defense chain for the next 40 years. Training, spare parts, software updates, weapons integration, all of it would have gone through American contractors. Now that plan is canceled. Madrid has officially withdrawn its intention to buy the F-35 and has chosen between the European Eurofighter Typhoon and the Franco-German FCAS. Its defense budget for the new fighter, totaling 10.5 billion euros, roughly $12 billion, will now go primarily to European suppliers. This is more than just an equipment purchase. It is a statement of European defense sovereignty and a rejection of dependence on American systems that come with political strings attached. And now, Switzerland has joined them. Despite its well-known neutrality, Bern had remained a quiet but steady partner in Western defense. In 2022, it signed a contract for 36 F-35A fighters worth 7.3 billion Swiss francs, about $9 billion. It was one of the largest defense procurements in the country's history. The deal was meant to secure close ties with the Pentagon and Lockheed Martin for decades ahead. Now, however, Switzerland's parliament is openly discussing its cancellation. The reasons are clear. Trump's tariffs have hit Swiss exports with rates of up to 39%. Lawmakers are now asking, why reward economic sanctions with a multi-billion franc contract? Equally important is the cultural shift. More and more European governments are openly stating that they need weapon systems they can control entirely on their own, without foreign kill switches, without dependence on American software updates, and without the risk that sanctions could cut off access to spare parts. Spain's rejection and Switzerland's resistance fit neatly into this logic. And let's be honest, Washington did not end up in this situation by accident. A combination of tariff wars, aggressive pressure in arms sales, and the Trump administration's pay up or be punished policy has made allies feel less like partners and more like clients to be squeezed. The key question now is this: will other NATO members follow their lead? And if so, how much of its defense capability can the United States lose before this process becomes irreversible? And to stay updated on how this situation unfolds, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. See you in the next episode.